In the 1970s, feeding 4 people on $3 was a documented household reality, not a gimmick. Rising food prices and modest wages forced families to master low-cost cooking with precision and discipline. Home kitchens relied on bulk staples, careful planning, and methods recorded in community cookbooks and government food guides. Every ingredient had a purpose. Every meal carried weight. These techniques kept families fed week after week, without waste or excess. Many of these methods quietly disappeared as food systems changed. Understanding how they worked matters, because they reveal how ordinary households survived pressure that reshaped American eating habits forever. In the early 1970s, $3 could still feed a family of 4 for a full day when planned carefully. This was not accidental. It was the result of budgeting habits shaped by post-war frugality and reinforced by rising inflation. Weekly menus were written in advance. Shopping lists were strict and rarely changed. A common strategy began with starch. Rice, dried beans, pasta, and potatoes formed the foundation of most meals. These items were inexpensive, filling, and widely available. Meat was treated as a flavor, not a centerpiece. 1 pound of ground beef or chicken backs could season several meals when stretched with vegetables and grains. Government extension offices published low-cost meal guides that influenced home cooking. These guides emphasized calories, protein, and satiety rather than appearance. A typical dinner might include bean soup thickened with potatoes, served with bread and a small portion of meat broth. Leftovers were expected and reused the next day. Breakfasts were simple and repeatable. Oatmeal, toast, and eggs provided reliable nutrition at minimal cost. Sugar and milk were measured, not poured freely. Lunch often reused dinner components, packed into containers for work or school. Nothing was discarded without purpose. Vegetable scraps flavored stock. Bacon fat was saved for frying. Stale bread became crumbs or pudding. Cooking knowledge passed quietly between generations, reinforced by necessity rather than nostalgia. These practices fed families consistently. They demanded attention, discipline, and time. They also reduced dependence on packaged foods. By understanding these methods, the viewer begins to see how $3 once carried real power at the dinner table. This knowledge mattered because food security shaped morale, health, and household stability. Every successful low-cost meal reduced anxiety, strengthened routines, and protected families from hunger during uncertain economic years. These lessons quietly guided kitchens across the nation. Shopping habits in the 1970s were as important as cooking itself. Feeding 4 people on $3 required strict control at the grocery store. Most families shopped once a week, often with cash, which limited impulse spending. Prices were memorized. Brands were secondary. Weight and volume mattered more than labels. Bulk bins and store brands played a central role. Flour, cornmeal, sugar, and dried beans were purchased in larger quantities because the cost per pound was lower. Canned goods were chosen carefully, often only during sales. Home cooks compared unit prices long before the term became common. This knowledge came from experience, not marketing. Seasonal produce was prioritized. Potatoes, cabbage, onions, and carrots were dependable and inexpensive. These vegetables stored well and could appear in multiple meals. Fresh fruit was limited, often reserved for weekends or special dinners. Frozen vegetables were used when affordable, especially for peas and spinach. Meat counters offered cheaper cuts that required longer cooking. Chuck roast, liver, neck bones, and chicken backs were common purchases. These cuts provided flavor and protein when cooked slowly. A single purchase could support several meals through stews, gravies, and soups. Coupons were used but not relied upon. Many households did not have access to large coupon collections. Instead, savings came from routine habits and familiarity with store layouts. Some families visited more than one store to complete a week's shopping within budget. The checkout total was watched closely. Items were removed if the amount exceeded the limit. This discipline was normal and expected. Children often witnessed these decisions, learning restraint through observation. These shopping practices formed the first defense against hunger. By controlling spending before cooking began, families ensured that limited money lasted. The success of low-cost meals started in the aisle, not the kitchen. Meal preparation in the 1970s followed a rhythm shaped by time and necessity. Cooking was rarely spontaneous. It was scheduled around work hours, school routines, and fuel costs. Most meals were prepared at home because eating out was considered a luxury. Stoves were used efficiently. Ovens were filled with multiple dishes at once to conserve heat. A pot simmering for supper often began early in the day. Slow cooking softened cheaper ingredients and improved flavor without additional cost. This method allowed tougher cuts of meat and dried legumes to become filling meals. Soups and casseroles dominated dinner tables. These dishes combined starch, vegetables, and small amounts of protein into a single pot. Portions were controlled and evenly divided. Seconds were limited, especially early in the week. Remaining food was covered and stored for reuse. Cooking fat was handled carefully. Butter, lard, and saved drippings were measured and reused. Frying was limited. Boiling, baking, and stewing were preferred methods because they required less fat and reduced waste. Seasoning relied on salt, pepper, onions, and bay leaves. Spices were used sparingly due to cost. Dishes were washed immediately to preserve water and soap. Kitchen orders supported efficiency. A clean workspace allowed leftovers to be processed quickly into future meals. This practice reduced spoilage and extended food use. Children were often involved. They peeled vegetables, stirred pots, and learned timing by watching adults work. Cooking skills were practical lessons, not hobbies. Mistakes were corrected quietly because food loss had consequences. These preparation methods turned limited groceries into reliable meals. They required patience and planning rather than abundance. Each step protected the household budget. By mastering preparation, families transformed basic ingredients into sustenance. This discipline ensured that $3 could last the entire day without compromise or waste. Leftovers were not considered secondary meals in the 1970s. They were a planned continuation of the original dish. Cooking always accounted for the next day. This approach ensured that food purchased once provided nourishment multiple times. Dinner leftovers were cooled, covered, and stored carefully. Refrigerators were smaller, so space was managed deliberately. Items were labeled mentally by placement rather than writing. Soups thickened overnight and became more filling. Roasts were sliced thin to stretch portions further. Nothing was reheated without a purpose. A single meal often transformed into another dish. Cooked beans became spreads or patties. Potatoes turned into hash or dumplings. Rice absorbed broth and seasoning for fried dishes or casseroles. These transformations were routine skills, learned through repetition. Bread played a central role in reuse. Stale slices became toast, crumbs, or pudding. Heel pieces thickened soups. No loaf was discarded until fully exhausted. Milk close to spoiling was used in baking rather than poured out. Lunches relied heavily on leftovers. Containers were packed early in the morning. Portions were modest but filling. This reduced the need for additional spending during the day. School lunches followed similar patterns, often mirroring the previous night's dinner. Freezers, when available, extended this system. Portions were wrapped tightly and saved for later weeks. Freezing prevented waste and provided relief during tighter periods. Even households without freezers planned meals back-to-back to avoid spoilage. This system required awareness and restraint. Eating was measured, not indulgent. Satisfaction came from reliability rather than variety. Families trusted that food would last because it always had. Leftover management protected the household from sudden shortages. It reduced shopping frequency and stabilized budgets. These practices ensured that $3 covered not just one meal but several. Food security depended on respect for what remained after the first serving. Breakfast habits in the 1970s reflected discipline rather than choice. Morning meals were designed to sustain energy while protecting the daily food supply. Variety was limited. Consistency mattered more than preference. Oatmeal was a staple. It was purchased in large containers and cooked slowly on the stove. Portions were measured. Sweetness came from small amounts of sugar or leftover syrup. Milk was added carefully to avoid waste. This meal provided warmth and fullness at minimal cost. Eggs were used strategically. They appeared several times a week, not daily. Fried eggs were often paired with toast to increase volume. Scrambled eggs were stretched with milk or bits of leftover vegetables. Hard-boiled eggs were prepared in batches and eaten over several mornings. Toast accompanied most breakfasts. Bread was sliced thin to extend the loaf. Margarine was spread lightly. Butter was reserved for cooking. Jam was used sparingly and often homemade. Each spread had a place and a limit. Cold cereal existed but was controlled. Boxes were divided by hand into equal servings. Children were taught not to refill bowls. Milk was poured after cereal to prevent excess use. These habits were reinforced daily. Coffee and tea were rationed. Grounds were reused once. Water was boiled only as needed. Sugar was counted by spoon. These small controls accumulated savings over time. Breakfast leftovers were uncommon, so planning was precise. Enough was cooked to satisfy, not to store. This prevented waste and preserved ingredients for later meals. These routines stabilized the household. A predictable breakfast reduced uncertainty and prevented early hunger. It allowed families to face long workdays and school hours without additional expense. By managing the first meal of the day, households protected the remaining budget. Breakfast set the tone for restraint and order. This structure ensured that limited funds supported the entire day. Food discipline began each morning at the kitchen table. Dinner held the greatest responsibility in a 1970s household. It carried the largest portion of calories and determined whether the food budget remained intact. Planning centered on this meal more than any other. Soups and stews appeared frequently because they allowed control. Ingredients were added gradually and adjusted based on availability. Water extended volume. Potatoes, rice, or noodles increased fullness without increasing cost. Meat, when included, was distributed evenly and never excessive. Casseroles served a similar purpose. They combined leftovers, starch, and vegetables into a single dish that baked slowly. Cheese, when used, was grated finely to cover more surface area. A small amount provided flavor without waste. Portioning was deliberate. Plates were served by one person, often the cook. This prevented uneven servings. Second helpings were delayed until everyone finished. This practice ensured fairness and reduced early depletion. Bread was placed on the table to supplement the meal. It absorbed broth and extended satisfaction. Butter was optional and limited. Salt and pepper were the primary seasonings available. Dinner was eaten at home, at the same time each evening when possible. This routine reduced snacking and preserved ingredients. Conversation was calm and focused. The meal was functional as well as social. Cleanup followed immediately. Leftovers were divided and stored with intention. Pots were rinsed while still warm to save water and effort. Cooking fat was strained and saved for reuse. Dinner planning shaped the entire day. A successful evening meal confirmed that the budget held. A poor decision at dinner created pressure for the next day. These dinners sustained families through demanding routines. They balanced nourishment with restraint. By controlling the most important meal, households ensured that $3 remained enough. Dinner was not indulgence. It was strategy, executed nightly at the table. Snacking in the 1970s was limited and intentional. It was not a constant activity. Between meals, food access was controlled to protect supplies intended for later use. Hunger between meals was managed, not immediately resolved. Common snacks were simple and low cost. A slice of bread with margarine, a piece of fruit, or leftover oatmeal served this purpose. Portions were small and expected to last until the next meal. Store-bought snack foods were rare in low-budget households and often reserved for special occasions. Children were taught boundaries around eating. Kitchens were not open throughout the day. Permission was often required to take food outside of meal times. This practice reduced waste and ensured fairness among family members. Beverages were also managed. Milk was considered food, not a drink. It was consumed at meals rather than between them. Water was the default option during the day. Juice was diluted or served in small amounts due to cost. Sweets existed but were controlled. Desserts were homemade and appeared once or twice a week. Rice pudding, bread pudding, or gelatin desserts provided sweetness without heavy expense. Sugar use was measured carefully. Treats were planned, not spontaneous. Evenings followed a routine that reduced late eating. Dinner was served early enough to prevent nighttime hunger. Leftovers were not touched after storage. This discipline preserved food for planned meals rather than impulse use. These habits created structure. They prevented gradual depletion of groceries. Snacking control often determined whether a budget succeeded or failed by the end of the week. By limiting access between meals, households extended their supplies without increasing discomfort. Hunger was addressed through routine rather than excess. This restraint allowed $3 to stretch further than expected. Snacking discipline supported the larger system. It protected meals already planned. In quiet ways, these limits ensured that every person was fed consistently, even when resources were tight. Dinner accompaniments in the 1970s were carefully chosen to maximize nutrition and fullness without increasing costs. Vegetables were essential, not optional. Seasonal and inexpensive varieties such as cabbage, carrots, onions, and potatoes appeared repeatedly. These items stored well and were versatile in multiple dishes. Vegetables were often prepared in bulk. Boiling or steaming retained calories while limiting fuel usage. Leftovers were transformed into soups, stews, or stir-ins for casseroles. Greens were sometimes mixed with potatoes or grains to increase volume. These combinations ensured that every meal delivered sustenance efficiently. Salads existed sparingly. When available, they were made with lettuce, radishes, or cucumbers, often dressed lightly with homemade vinaigrette. Lettuce was washed thoroughly to prevent spoilage and portions were modest. Salad was a supplement, not a primary component. Grains remained a foundation. Rice and pasta were used to bulk out meals. Starches absorbed sauces and gravies, increasing perceived portion sizes. Potatoes were baked, boiled, or mashed depending on convenience and timing. Every preparation method focused on stretching calories without wasting ingredients. Protein was measured carefully. Meat was distributed evenly and often mixed with beans, rice, or vegetables to increase volume. Canned tuna, eggs, and occasional poultry or pork provided variation. Cooking methods preserved flavor while minimizing fat usage. Broths were saved for future dishes, adding richness to simple meals. Bread and rolls supplemented these meals. Stale bread was recycled into crumbs, stuffing, or pudding. Cornmeal or flour could stretch further in pancakes or dumplings. Nothing was wasted. Every bite had a purpose. Evening meals were deliberate exercises in economy and nutrition. Each component had a clear function, contributing to fullness, variety, or flavor. Planning these accompaniments was critical because they ensured that limited resources could sustain a household reliably. By controlling side dishes as carefully as main courses, families maximized the value of every ingredient. Every meal became a demonstration of skill, discipline, and foresight. It was not indulgence, it was survival executed with precision. Meal timing and routine played a central role in 1970s household management. Families structured their day around food to ensure efficiency, reduce waste, and protect limited budgets. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner occurred at predictable hours, and adherence to this schedule was expected. Lunch was often the most flexible meal. For working adults and schoolchildren, it relied heavily on leftovers from the previous night. Soups, stews, and casseroles were divided into portions, packed carefully into containers. This reuse allowed one dinner to provide both evening and midday nourishment. Portion sizes were deliberate, ensuring that nothing ran out prematurely. Children were taught early how to manage meals. They learned to consume moderate portions, save the rest, and avoid unnecessary snacking. This education reinforced household budgeting and developed practical skills that would persist into adulthood. Cooking tools were used efficiently. A single pot might serve multiple purposes throughout the day. Ovens were scheduled to bake several items simultaneously. Stove burners were timed so that boiling, simmering, and reheating occurred with minimal fuel use. Planning reduced unnecessary labor and expense. Evening meals were designed to replenish energy after the day's work. Vegetables, starches, and small amounts of meat were combined into hearty dishes. Bread or rolls supplemented portions, absorbing sauces and extending satiety. Desserts were rare, controlled, and often made from leftover ingredients. Cleanup was part of the routine. Washing dishes immediately, saving cooking fat, and organizing leftovers ensured food longevity. These practices minimized waste and preserved household resources. By adhering to strict timing and meal routines, families maximized the utility of $3 per day. Every hour and every ingredient were accounted for. This structure reinforced discipline, provided stability, and protected against hunger. It ensured that even limited funds could feed a household reliably, making the management of time and routine as important as the ingredients themselves. Household budgeting extended beyond meals to include every aspect of kitchen management. In the 1970s, families treated groceries as investments, ensuring that each item served multiple purposes. Nothing was purchased without a plan. Every ingredient had a role in at least one meal, often more. Pantry organization was critical. Items were grouped by type, usage frequency, and shelf life. Flour, sugar, and beans were kept together for easy access, while perishable goods were rotated to prevent spoilage. This system reduced waste and allowed cooks to monitor supplies accurately. Cooking equipment was maintained carefully. Pots, pans, and utensils were used for decades. Their condition affected efficiency and outcomes. A well-kept stove, oven, or kettle conserved fuel, which was an additional, indirect form of budgeting. Households also reused packaging. Glass jars, tins, and containers were cleaned and repurposed for storage. Labels were removed or replaced with handwritten notes. This practice minimized unnecessary spending and maximized utility. Leftovers were tracked and repurposed systematically. Monday's stew could become Tuesday's casserole. Wednesday's bread might appear in pudding on Thursday. Even small quantities were incorporated into meals to prevent waste. Special occasions were planned well in advance. Ingredients for birthdays or holidays were purchased gradually, often weeks ahead. This careful planning avoided last-minute spending and maintained the regular meal schedule. Record-keeping was informal but effective. Many households kept notebooks, jotting down menus, expenses, and recipes. This practice reinforced budgeting habits and ensured consistency across meals. These methods ensured that $3 could feed 4 people reliably. Food was treated with respect and foresight. Every purchase, preparation, and portion contributed to the household's stability. By mastering these techniques, families created a resilient system, allowing them to survive economic pressure and keep everyone nourished, demonstrating the power of disciplined planning and resourcefulness in the 1970s kitchen. Feeding 4 people on $3 in the 1970s was more than a necessity. It was a skill passed down quietly through kitchens across America. Every meal, every leftover, every careful purchase carried purpose. Families stretched ingredients, preserved food, and planned with precision, ensuring that hunger never took control. These practices shaped routines, taught discipline, and protected households during uncertain times. Understanding these methods reminds us that ingenuity and careful planning once determined daily survival at the dinner table. If you appreciate these lost strategies and want more forgotten food history, subscribe and explore the meals that time almost forgot.